let's have a chat about the 4 different types of psychotherapies that the majority of psychologists will prescribe to their patients. Now, the 4 different types. First one, psychoanalytic. Second, humanistic. Third, behavioral. And fourth, cognitive. Now, all of these therapies are meant to help a patient deal with a psychological disorder, a hard time in their life, whether it be from relationships, stress from work, school, their family life, whatever it is, or if they just need somebody to talk to convey their deep, dark secrets. So, I'm going to go over the 4 different types. So, a psychoanalytic therapist deals closely with Freud's research, meaning these therapists will look more closely at the unconscious impulses and anxieties and internal conflicts that are present in the individual. So they will look at how are you responding to those questions. Like, is your facial expressions more like out of fear, or are you just really annoyed by certain questions? This method allows them to dig deep in order to get to the root of the problem, where the therapist and the patient will develop a closer bond as they work together. Usually with a psychoanalytic, they will spend lots of time with their patient, constantly asking them questions to see if they can get more information about what's bothering the patient so they can better treat them. The problem with psychoanalytic approach is, well, today it's not commonly used on therapy sessions, and requires a patient to be seen multiple times a week, making it for a slow and monotonous ordeal. Usually people see psychoanalytic therapists, they see him 7 days a week for 8 months, constantly, and they see him for 2 to 3 hours each day. Now you can imagine seeing a therapist every single day of the week for months on end. What are you really going to get out of it? You also have to bring your checkbook, because these sessions are generally very, very, very expensive, and they're at least 3 times as much as many of the other therapies that I will be discussing about later. Another problem patients will experience is no matter how many times they attend these sessions, they never really get any better and just continue as they were beforehand. So if you're thinking about getting psychoanalytic therapy, really evaluate your decision. Next is the humanist therapy approach. A humanist will look at what your potential is and that you can choose whatever path you want to embark on, which allows the client to generally have control in the therapy sessions. This then leads me into Carl Rogers' client-centered therapy, meaning the patient generally has the floor. The therapist will sit back, write down everything that's being discussed, and then offer their own personal experiences with the issue that's being addressed by the patient. So if there was a incident where the patient was being severely bullied, the humanist would then write down what the patient is telling them, and then they would then go back and say, oh, you know what? I've actually had that happen to me in school. You know, I was severely bullied. So you're enacting more of a genuineness. You're being more of a human. You're being empathetic. you understand what they're going through. So, most of the times when they're doing client-centered therapy, the client, because humanists see their people that come into them as being clients rather than patients. Going back to psychoanalytic, those people generally are very professional, very stern, Freudian type. Whereas humanists are very kind of relaxed. They're more personable. They're more of a, it's not like you're talking to a brick wall like you would if you would be talking to a psychoanalytic, but that's my own gripe on them. Even though it sounds all fine and dandy, the drawback to this approach is that even though you're having one-on-one conversations with the client, you're not really solving the underlying problem or changing the person as a whole. So, yeah, it's great that they're able to talk about it, but you're not really addressing the problem. You're just giving them room to, feel comfortable talking about it, but you don't offer any suggestions to help curb their behavior. Which gets me to my next topic of behavioral approach. So the behavioral aspect deals more with correcting a certain behavior. For example, chewing on your fingernails. Kind of commonplace. So instead of focusing, this is the big difference, instead of focusing on past behaviors, things you've done on the past, behavioral therapists will mainly focus on what's at present. What are you doing presently that needs to be changed? Now, change will most often involve classical conditioning, operant conditioning, or observational learning. And right here should be a link of my conversation that I had with you all about those three different types of learning or behavioral correctness. So it should be right there. If not, and if I forget to put it right there, it should be in the description box below. So it'll be there. Anywho, this will then allow you to associate something else when you think about twirling your hair. So when you think about, I don't have any hair that I could twirl, but if you think about twirling your hair, the behavioral therapist may associate twirling your hair with, let's do something extreme like vomiting. So every time you think about twirling your hair, you'll become nauseous. This is also common when people are trying to get off their alcoholism. Behavioral therapists will generally give them a pill, usually it's a placebo, that they will tell them by taking this pill they will no longer have an urge to drink alcohol, and whenever they drink alcohol, they'll then throw up. It's actually very, very, very successful, and it works a lot. Still a common approach to curing alcoholism for people that are in Alcoholics Anonymous. So this also has a downside. Like with all therapies, there is a downside. Downside to this is you could end up like little Albert. Little Albert was a young boy who was conditioned to fear fuzzy white rats. Even though they're tame lab rats, he was conditioned to fear the living hell out of them because anytime he saw the lab rat, a loud banging noise, a round hammer would be smashed on the ground every time he saw the rat. So, as you can imagine, he was then conditioned to where anytime he saw the rat, he became fearful. Because his brain associated rat with loud banging noise. However, little Albert then started to become fearful of fur coats, cotton balls, and even poor old Santa Claus. He couldn't see Santa without bawling his eyes out. Horrible. Absolutely horrible. Oh, Skinner. Skinner, you are a madman. That's beside the point. Okay, last but not least, cognitive. The cognitive approach explains that what you continue to find yourself doing is the result of faulty brain wiring, meaning that what you are doing is bad thinking. And they want to change it into good thinking. How you think can have an impact on how you perceive certain things as good or as bad. Once you identify this bad thinking, they'll then alter it to be more positive, as I said before, which will rid you of your negativity. They are able to do this by examining what is your perception of how things are going. So they'll generally give you a list, maybe 10 to 20 quick questions from 1 to 5, and you will answer how you perceive your thinking is affecting you. And then while they go through changing your thought processes, they'll then go back and say, well, before you answered on number 5 as a 3, or you answered number 6 as like a 5, but now number 3 is actually a 4, but number 6 is now a 2. So it then changes how you perceive your insight. This approach, though, has much to be desired, since if you infer that a person's thoughts are the reasons why they are sad or depressed or instance, then that will only make them feel worse and think more negatively than before. So if you go up to a person that is suffering from depression and you say, well, your thinking is what's making you depressed, you could be the total douchebag and go the whole rational emotional behavioral therapist or the Ellis approach and be a total douchebag and say, you are a pussy because your thinking is what's making you depressed. See, Ellis was very renowned for being an asshole. But his counterpart, Beck, actually worked with behavioral therapists first as a psychoanalytic therapist, but then realized that how he was taught is that people who have depression, they just always feel that they are meant to suffer, that they're meant to be tormented. But what he found out is depressed people or people who are suffering from depression, they don't think that way. They think it's how the world perceives them, how their outward appearance is perceived by the general population as being depressed. So they will then label them as a depressed person. And that label then makes them feel bad. How would you feel if you were labeled as a schizophrenic? You feel good about that? I wouldn't feel good about that. I would feel like shit. I would feel bad. I wouldn't want to leave my house. That's why this approach wouldn't really be good. So, the bottom line of this, going over the 4 different types of psychotherapies, is that is psychotherapy even worth it? Is it effective? With psychotherapy, it uses a wide variety of techniques to help an individual with their problems. So it uses a plethora of different psychological ideas to help the person individually, which is good. If you just had one so grandiose cure, that's not going to help this person or that person that have different symptoms or different disorder. It's not going to help them at all. The plus side of this is that psychotherapy uses a collection of established psychological perspectives that continue to work for those suffering with psychological problems and has been proven scientifically, which helps validate its success, because nothing is worth its grain of salt if it cannot be proved in a lab, by a research study. If it cannot be proved, especially when it comes to psychology, because it's a science. You observe things happening. So, the relationship between the client and the therapist is very strong. And there's a bond that is formed not only in trust, but in friendship as well. I will be providing an article in the description box below that reiterates my points that I've said. I found this article that, yes, it does lament that that psychotherapy is the cheaper alternative than taking mass amounts of medication. Which would be better? Seeing a therapist in one of the 4 psychotherapy principles that I just discussed, or taking a massive amount of medication? Which would you rather pick?